Russia's President Vladimir Putin is set to touch down in North Korea for the first trip there in more than 2 decades. He's already travelled through Yakutsk in Russia's Far East, and he's expected to be in Pyongyang later on Tuesday evening. Putin's trip is aimed at strengthening ties and getting munitions, as well as developing trade that avoids Western sanctions. Rob McBride, our correspondent, joins us now from Yeonpyeong in South Korea, which is on the maritime border with the north. Hi, Rob. President Putin is returning to North Korea, as we said, for the first time in nearly 24 years. But why now?
Yeah, this is a very consequential trip by Vladimir Putin, symbolically perhaps turning away from the West and heading east and trying to look for alternative power structures, power blocks to try to form new friendships, given his shunning by much of the Western powers led by the United States. He is heading for countries that have had traditional friendships with Russia, and before Russia, the Soviet Union. So ultimately, he will be going to Vietnam, but the first port of call will be North Korea. He will be arriving overnight Tuesday, Wednesday into Pyongyang. We know that they are all set for what is being treated as a state visit, with the streets decked out in the flags of both Russia and North Korea. Wednesday, we will see much of the business taking place. There will be the usual formalities that you could expect, ceremonials such as wreath laying, inspecting the guards of honor, also formal receptions. But the real business of the day will be the signing of what's being called a comprehensive partnership agreement between the two sides. This covers things, according to the Russians, such as trade and security issues. Importantly, things which the West, according to Vladimir Putin, will have nothing to do with. This will just purely between Russia and North Korea, two countries that have been very much thrown together, if you like, by international sanctions, countries that have been largely shunned by large sections of the international community. It is thought that over the last few years, especially, the two countries have been circumventing some of the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia and North Korea. But the suspicion is that Russia will be looking for more munitions. They deny that North Korea has been supplying munitions for the war in Ukraine, but that is the expectation.
And Rob, of course, the visit does come at a time of heightened tension between the two Koreas. One wonders how seriously Seoul is observing what's going on.
Seoul is following this extremely closely and with extreme concern. This is a reciprocal visit. This follows Kim Jong Un going to visit a cosmodrome in the far east of Russia as a guest of Vladimir Putin last September. And everybody expects that in South Korea, that North Korea is looking for advanced space technology from the Russians to help it put a spy satellite into space. There are also concerns that Russia may help North Korea with other weapons programs, and that is obviously of a concern if those weapons are directed at the south. And it does come at a time of heightened tensions on the DMZ. We have seen a lot of activity all along that border here on Yeonpyeong Island. This is at the very western end of the maritime frontier between the two Koreas. There have been a number of clashes here. There are more artillery drills expected here, which has local residents concerned. And we've been hearing that just on Tuesday from the South Korean military, there have been reports of military soldiers from the north going into the DMZ and building up fortifications, laying new landmines. And according to the South Korean military, they've had to fire warning shots when those soldiers have crossed over the line to get back to the other side of it. So these are tense times indeed.
Indeed. For the update, thanks so much, Rob McBride, there for us in South Korea. Let's cross over. There'll be, of course, much to discuss between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un when they meet. Both leaders need military assistance from each other, as Al Jazeera's defence editor Alex Gatopoulos explains.
Ties have been deepening between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un. Both Russia and North Korea have much to offer each other. Russia desperately needs artillery ammunition from as many sources as possible for its war in Ukraine. South Korean estimates that North Korea has already supplied more than 3 million large-caliber artillery shells by ship, as well as Grad rockets and short-range ballistic missiles. Big numbers, but there's evidence the quality is questionable. Ukrainian reports say that North Korean weapons stocks captured in the conflict were 40 to 50 years old and frequently failed. North Korea is also looking for help with its military satellite program. Only one's been launched so far, and there have been many failures. The latest was in May this year when a rocket carrying a second satellite blew up shortly after launch. Evidence suggests Russia is helping North Korea test new rocket fuels, with Kim Jong Un hoping Moscow's expertise in space launches will help his country develop a military observation satellite program of its own.
Robert Kelly is a professor of international relations at Pusan National University. He joins us live from Pusan in South Korea. Dr. Kelly, always good to have you on the programme for your insight. I'm sure that each leader has their own shopping list when they meet in North Korea. Can we just begin with that military wish list? Because this is more than just stopping by for a cup of tea, isn't it?
Sure. I think the Russians are struggling in Ukraine, right? I mean, the war was supposed to take like a couple weeks, and here we are now in like the 28th month or something like that, right? We know that the Russians are starting to use older equipment in the war, tanks and armored vehicles from the 1960s. And so it doesn't look like, and we don't know, of course, but it doesn't look like the Russian defense industrial base can keep up with the losses in the war. And so they're shopping around, right? China would be the ideal place to go, but, you know, China's in a tough spot here. But North Korea has a Soviet era defense industrial base, right? It's produced for its enormous military since the 1960s. And so presumably, again, we don't know, but presumably the North Koreans are sitting on hundreds of thousands or millions of shells. And, you know, as your correspondent said, right, the South Korean government estimates that many of those have been sent to the Russians, right? And so the big question then is, what are the North Koreans getting in response?
Well, indeed, yeah, that is what will they want? Because it's obviously a tit for tat scenario, I suppose. Really, North Korea needs technology, doesn't it? And Russia can offer that, especially when we saw Kim visit one of Russia's cosmodromes back last September. And it wants to develop that ballistic missile program. This is where you might say both sides can have a symbiotic relationship as such.
Yeah, definitely, right? And I think they both realized that pretty quickly, right? North Korea has trouble, obviously, with missile launches. It's surrounded by countries when it fires rockets over Japan, right? Everybody has sort of a big, this kind of like a big regional, flim-flam over that, right? Where, North Korea gets sort of like a new round of sanctions or something like that. So getting telemetry information from the Iranians, from the Russians is really, really valuable for them, right? We know that North Korea can build a missile. We're not sure if North Korea can actually send a missile to a particular point on the map, right? If they fire at the United States, it's going to land in the Gulf of Mexico. And so we think that, the Russians can provide them with targeting information, right? We know, for example, that they are probably going to help them put a satellite in space. We're extrapolating here, but that's what it looks like. So, if you're North Korea, that's what you want from the Russians, right? I mean, it'd be nice to have cash, I suppose, right? But what you really want from the Russians are these advanced technologies for the weapons of mass destruction program, the kinds of things that, like I said, the North Koreans really have trouble doing here, like missile tests, because North Korea is surrounded, right? Or, larger, better information about WMD.
It's not all just about military, is it? There's also a huge diplomatic scenario going on here. And I spoke just yesterday to Andrei Lankov. He's Professor of Korean Studies at Kookmin University in Seoul. I'm sure you know him. And we were talking about the fact that Russia is also wary too of too much support for North Korea, because it is warming its relationship with South Korea, who hasn't fully supported Western countries in the backing of the assault on Ukraine. So Moscow has got an eye on Seoul as well. Would you agree that that is also part of the diplomatic manoeuvring that's going on right now?
Yeah, definitely. I think both China and Russia have been very, very wary for a long time about helping North Korea too much, right? I mean, they both appreciate North Korea, if you will, as sort of a buffer between them and the United States and South Korea and Japan. They appreciate the fact that North Korea is this sort of nuisance and troublemaker. And we spend all this time talking about it, and they're dealing meth and they're selling missile parts and whatever, right? But we worry about that a lot, right? But we also know that North Korea is an Orwellian tyranny that's governed by a very paranoid, isolated class of people. We don't really know very well how decisions are made, right? The Chinese would like North Korea to survive, for example, but not have nuclear weapons. I imagine the Russians probably think the same way. So, I mean, it's kind of an interesting debate. I imagine what's going on in Moscow, right? How desperate are you for assistance in the war, right? And what are you willing to give to the North Koreans, who are pretty unreliable? And what are they going to do with it? Are they going to sell it later? Are they going to use it? Right. So, yeah, I mean, and of course, once you do that, if you give too much to the North Koreans, then you really burn your bridges with South Korea, which is, of course, significantly more wealthy and has a much better economic relationship with Russia. Right. And if you burn that bridge, you can't export and import from from here in South Korea. And South Korean economy is like 32 times the size of North Korea. So the relationship really is military and transactional, and you don't want to burn your bridges too much if you don't have to.
Let's see what does come out of this meeting. For the moment, Professor Robert Kelly, it's always good to speak to you. Thanks for your time.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.